how long had you been CEO and obviously founder, but before the snowmobile accident? And what were you thinking before the snowmobile accident? What were you thinking after? And tell us all about it.
So I was HubSpot CEO for 15 years, and I was snowmobiling one day, and I basically went off a cliff. My son was driving, and got kind of breaking the gas backwards. Hit the gas at the wrong time. We went up over the lip and just lost gravity. I remember going over and just like, oh my God. And then, your brain just gets shut up. I don't remember flying down a mile down, smashing snowmobiles in 1,000 pieces. We were in 1,000 pieces. And I remember sitting there, if I get out of this thing, I'm going to make some changes.
Glue Guys is proud to have Ramp as the first presenting sponsor of the podcast. I was shocked to learn that most financial teams spend 80% of their time doing operational work and only 20% of their time doing strategic work. Ramp flips that equation. This financial operations platform simplifies everything about how businesses spend money and spend their time. With Ramp, you can manage spend approvals, control your expenses, automate your accounting, track your vendor relationships, and even book your travel. Ramp enables finance teams to focus all of their attention on what's most important. It allows companies to issue physical and virtual cards to every employee with spend limits, category restrictions, and automated compliance checks to ensure spend outside of expense policy is never allowed to happen. Ramp eliminates both manual expense reports for employees and removes the need for accountants to spend hundreds of manual hours each month classifying transactions so financials are accurate. The Ramp team is all in on saving their customers time and money. Ramp is used by best-in-class businesses like Shopify, Airbnb, Anduril, and many more. They all use Ramp to manage their spend and automate away tedious financial processes that just distract from the main thing. Ramp is easy to use. Get started now and build a more efficient team and a more profitable business, whether you have 5 employees or 25,000. Go to ramp.com/GG to sign up for free and get a $250 welcome bonus. That's ramp.com/GG.
All right, Glue Guy listeners, let's talk about something that might just change the way you sleep forever. 8 Sleep. You've probably heard of the pod, right? I mean, if it's good enough for Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, it's probably worth checking out for yourself. But they've just upped their game with the Pod 4 Ultra, the new gold standard in intelligent sleep systems. Now, here's the deal. The Pod 4 Ultra is like having a climate-controlled assistant in your bed. No, not like that, you freaks, but it is simple. You just add it to your current mattress like a fitted sheet and boom, it automatically cools or warms each side of your bed. So no more battles over the thermostat with your partner, no more blanket tug of war. It's all been settled. It's been clinically proven to give you up to an hour more quality of sleep every night, which, who couldn't use that? The standout feature here is the cooling capability. This thing can cool your side of the bed to 20 degrees below room temperature. Perfect for those hot summer nights. Now imagine setting your bed to a perfect 55 degrees while you're in a deep sleep, all managed by the Pod's autopilot feature, which adjusts the temperature throughout the night. So you get a deeper, more restorative sleep even without thinking about it. Unbelievable. Now, I took over 1,000 naps over the course of my 13-year NBA career. I played well over 1,000 games, and Michael Lewis once called me the no stats all-star. Now, if I had 8 sleep during my career, I would have been the stats all-star. Seriously. Sleep is the new Rolex, it's the new Mercedes, it's the new luxury brand. So why wouldn't you want the best sleep money can buy, the best sleep possible? Now, the best part, you can add the Pod 4 Ultra to any bed, whether you're just an athlete trying to optimize recovery or someone looking to improve your quality of life. So right now, you can get $350 off the Pod 4 Ultra at 8sleep.com/Glue Guys. Just use the code Glue Guys. Level up your sleep and thank me later.
All right, so this week we have my friend Brian Halligan, who is the executive chairman of HubSpot and is the founder and was the CEO for 15 years before stepping into the exec chairman role. And Brian, in addition to being the father of inbound marketing, is also just an amazing leader. He's a CEO coach now. And, it's not his career that makes him interesting, even though it's incredible. Founder of a climate change firm, professor at MIT, senior advisor at Sequoia. It's that he can kind of look into your soul when it comes to leadership and just help. And he's got this incredible piece of writing. He's written a couple books. Huge Grateful Dead fan, but he's written a couple books.
Huge Deadhead.
Deadhead.
It's not, I think he'd be upset if we left that off the resume.
I agree with you. I think he's been to like hundreds of concerts, hundreds of Grateful Dead concerts. But then most recently, he just published this thing of everything he's ever learned from leading at HubSpot. And we have a Glue Guys shout out in there.
I mean, crazy. And like his journey is the near-death experience.
Oh, yeah. The real kinship with you, Alex.
Which was amazing. Like, I mean, just to think about his journey and like what you said, like it's one thing to see it all on paper, but like the person he is and like, at this end of it. Now he's coaching CEOs, which I think is freaking amazing, because like there's not many people that are actually qualified to do this stuff. And this guy's one of them.
Alex, I just thought about this. We talk about this a lot. He might be, he's kind of a modern day Bill Campbell. Right? If you really think about it, I think that actually might be the reason he's so cool. That he's kind of, this generation, I don't know. I think he's on his way.
Do you think he'll call himself a glue guy?
I think, as you pointed out, it's hard to be a self-proclaimed glue guy, but I hope he starts to embrace that, because I think he's a glue guy for leaders and a glue guy for people. I do.
I couldn't agree more. I hope that people realize that like being glue guy doesn't mean you can still be, like, to your point, Shane, like you can be the leader, you can be the star and still be a glue guy. In fact, I think the best teams, that's the case.
Love it. On to our conversation with Brian.
How are the glue guys?
Doing great. Thank you for joining us, Brian. We appreciate you, man.
We were very happy that in the Halliganisms that, needing glue guys showed up. And we were wondering if that was a recent addition or if that's something you always had.
It was a recent addition. Robbie told me about the podcast, of course, and I've been listening to it. Really enjoying it. You guys are terrific. And it was a recent addition. But it's true. I think of, like, in HubSpot, like, your head of sales is kind of the star of the company and closing big deals and posting big numbers. But as the company goes from, like, startup mode, like 100 people, to scale up mode, 1,000 people, the leverage really shifts to the glue guy or gal that works for that head of sales. And the glue guy can keep the whole complicated system in his head and moves all the knobs and dials around, allocates the resources wisely. That's kind of where the leverage shifts in from startup to scale up mode. And we had a couple at HubSpot that I wouldn't be sitting here on this call without.
I think it's funny because in the sports world, it's no different. Like, these guys that are important in the building sometimes aren't the same people that like the media or fans think that are important. Like again, to go to the stats, like just, especially today, like with fantasy sports, all they do is see the stats and like, hey, think that these guys are important. And those aren't necessarily the people that are celebrated as important inside the building or that are the biggest contributors to culture and like the backbone of a team or like the soul of the team. And so it's funny, but like in buildings, they are celebrated, right? Like, you're in Boston, like Matthew Slater, the longtime Patriot, like, I mean, he was the backbone of that team.
Yes.
And you'll never hear him I do TV for a living. You'll never hear him get talked about on TV by like national media like that. But, he certainly was a guy, like, I think the longest captain ever in Patriot history.
Yeah. One of the nice things about me in Boston is we won a lot of championships and had a lot of teams.
Here we fucking go.
Yeah, I know. A lot of we there from the guy who, was the founder of HubSpot talking about the Boston sports team. Okay, fine.
I get asked a lot about sports fans, and everybody thinks Philly fans are the worst. Everybody thinks like Raider fans are the worst.
Boston
and I universally,
definitely
it is like Boston fans, yes. Patriot fans, the worst. Yes. And it's just the fact that they've been so spoiled with 6 freaking titles in the last 20 years. Like, if they were bad, I think everybody would universally know them to be the worst fan base. Just one man's opinion.
Is that the Boston Celtics recently won the championship. And I feel like the team is I think it's a glue guy team. Like, Al Horford, Drew Holiday are like really, really glue guys. And even Tatum, who's, front and center, he wasn't shooting well in the championship, and he just rebounded and passed. He turned out to be, he put his ego aside and kind of did the glue guy thing in the championship. And I think championships are won by the glue guys as much as the stars.
It's funny you say that. We text about that team a lot. Ravi especially.
I dislike the Celtics intensely, but I like that team. But because I think Drew Holiday, Derek White, Al Horford, those guys they're amazing. They're amazing. So Brian, the thing you did in board meetings, I'm not going to text you, I'm just going to tell you, you supposedly would bring in like 8 or 10 people from the company into the board meeting and have people in the board see them. And that's not like bringing in one person from the company or bringing in like, I have the executives there every time. It was like a rotating cast of people that were really good and impactful. And all of a sudden you'd bring them to the board meeting, which that is unusual.
The other thing we do in board meetings that's great is we have customer panels. So we get a board meeting next week in San Francisco, and we get a panel with 5 customers on there. It'll be an hour and 15 minutes, and the board members can ping them with questions and really get in there with them. And that's my favorite thing we do. Every management team meeting, every company meeting, we have customers come and talk. I have found that to be, I did a lot of stupid things at HubSpot. I think that was one of the smarter things I did.
What's the most interesting thing you learned from your customers that you didn't know, or maybe overthought or underthought?
The first thing is like they would come in, and unless they were well coached, they would definitely blow smoke up your backside. And so it would take a few questions and some prodding from me to be brutally honest with us. We're not here to hear the good news. That's certainly one thing we heard. And every time we do it, we hear about big problems, either in our contracts or the way our processes work or where our product works, or part of our product we thought was great, wasn't great. We learn all kinds of stuff. And they'll come this time and be like, okay, we have all this new AI functionality in our product. Are you using it? Is it working? Do you like it? What's missing? What do you see around the corner? It's fabulous for us.
One thing that's crazy about that, Brian, I was just thinking as you were talking, it's weird. Like customers of HubSpot, if you think about it, like they have the power, right? That they are the customer. Yet even they, in a moment where they are asked, just like human nature, their nature is to be nice and not give you the feedback. And they're in like the power position, right? And it actually goes to like, think about how hard it is for someone who's not in the power position to ever tell you the truth about something you need to get better at. Just human nature wise, we so badly want to be liked that even when you're the customer, right? Your first reaction is like, let me just tell you the good stuff. So you really have to dig for feedback, especially if you're in any position of power.
And it was very much the case for us. Like we would do 360-degree reviews of our employees once a year. And mine would be very rosy because people would, they would want to tell me what I want to do. But people would tell me what I want to do.
And you're perfect, as we know. Yeah.
Anyway, this one year, my co-founder, Darmat, I'd say, hey, can you just do the review for me instead of like a normal process? So he did a survey of like 20 of the employees, the tech team, the boards, and customers. And he asked them 2 questions. First question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer Brian as CEO of HubSpot? And the second question was, why did you give that answer? And people wrote novels in the comments. And then he collated, it took him a while, and he gave me the report. And the front page was like my results and the kind of the histogram of my scores. And then there was a long report, and I was going through it. I was on page 10, and it was like each page was a feature. Like, Brian's good at explaining what HubSpot is. Brian's good at setting the tone on the culture. And then he would take quotes, direct quotes, and like paste them in. So it was really like, okay, really get it. And like, I'm 10 pages in. I'm pretty sure I was the best CEO ever. And then page 11 came, and that was the bugs. That was the first bug, and there were 11 pages of bugs after that. And I don't drink scotch. I'm not like a brown liquor guy. I remember at the end of it just thinking, I'm so bad at being a CEO. I drank 2 inches of scotch, straight down the scotch. Feedback's the breakfast of champions.
A couple of thoughts on that. Like, I can only imagine, and Shin, you could tell me this, like if a coach did that. By the way, was it anonymous?
Yep.
Okay. Like I could not imagine like if a head coach did that exact same thing. First off, you're totally right. Like, you're never going to make everybody happy. There are going to be a certain amount of people that don't feel like they're being utilized right, or don't mesh with your style, and are going to be pissed off about it. Right. Like, and I also think that the objective is to not necessarily be liked, right, from a head coach, right? Like, that's not what you're there to do, is to, obviously be liked by your employees. Like, certainly you want to build healthy culture, and if there's things that are very glaring. But I don't know how I feel about that. Like, certainly as like the starter, I could be like, oh, this coach is awesome. The backup quarterback probably like thinks this guy sucks. I'm better. Why isn't he playing me? And then, so how objective were you like with that, I guess, as you got like, especially even some of the bugs? Like, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, again, there's going to be disgruntled employees at any company, certainly of scale.
We do it every year. It's painful every year. I posted on the wiki so everyone can see it in the company. And my reaction to it the first couple of years was to try to fix my bugs. I think it's natural. And then over time, like, the same bugs would show up every year. And like, if I put $1's worth of calories into fixing a bug, I might get $1.01 out. But like, I found that if I focused on my strengths and leaned into a strength, and I put $1 into a strength, I could get $10 out, like just much more leverage. And over time, I kind of gave up on fixing my weaknesses and just tried to hire around all the weaknesses. And that ended up working for me. I think the conventional wisdom is fix your bugs, but for me, I just live with them.
Brian, can you give us some examples of what some of those bugs were? Just to like, what were people saying you needed to get better at?
I can just be very passionate about things and excited, and I can push people pretty hard, and I'm aggressive, like I really want to win. And I'm not really a glue guy. I'm out front and I'm pushing, and some of that aggression, some like pushing, and that's not good enough. Like, I push pretty hard, and I got a lot of feedback. It turns out people didn't like that.
You got told that passion was a bug?
I think some of my features were also bugs.
Do you think there's something to the fact that you said, like, there's an employee review, right? So all these employees are doing a review, and that here is the head of the company, the founder, is stepping up and doing his own review and making it public. And do you think, regardless of what you did with the bugs or the features, like, I think that there's like power in that example, right? Like, as a tone for the company that like, no one's above this. We all need to get better.
I don't know for sure. That was my plan. Like, so I would post the entire 21 pages, and then I would write a 1-page, like, my plan for the year. And I remember one of the years was, Brian's got to grow up and be the leader HubSpot needs to scale to the next level. That was sort of the title of it. And then I had like, here are the things I'm working on. And the early ones were like, here are the bugs I'm going to fix. The later ones were, here are the strengths I'm going to make better. And I gotta believe that some of the people saw it and said, if he's working on himself, I should work on myself.
What'd your board say? Did your board say, well, this is like not the strong, Spartacus that we need? Did they appreciate that? I mean, did you ever get questions in board meetings about, are you sure you want to show everything here?
Yeah, I gave it to the board. They all got the full report. I don't know if they read through the whole thing. They got my summary, and then I would report out to the board on it every year. And I think the transparency built trust with the board. And I think the transparency built trust with the employees. I think that maybe some of the board members thought it was weird, but I'm a little weird. Fine.
Brian, on that, one of the things you wrote about in the Halliganisms, which I'd recommend everyone read, all the lessons you've learned from, building HubSpot and then also being the exec chair. You talked about imposter syndrome a lot in there, or you talked about it in there, and you sort of made this very interesting thing of like, you said you still feel it, right? So if you're a successful company, you're like, I feel weird writing this right now. And I mean, you look like you're 35, but you're older than that. So I think to have the imposter syndrome, how did you have the imposter syndrome and still feel comfortable being yourself? So what I mean by that is, like, if a board member is telling you to do something, if employees are telling you to do something and you have imposter syndrome, how did you still have the strength to kind of just do it your own way when you, in the back of your mind, you're kind of like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Do you see what I'm saying?
Robbie, when I really feel imposter syndrome like the most?
In the Sequoia partner meeting?
Right now. Like, I'm on a fucking podcast with...
Join the club, Brian. You and me both, brother.
Yeah.
Trust me, all 20 of our listeners don't feel the same. Okay. They're shooting this podcast to, like, Pluto to see if there's any intelligent life. That's what this podcast is being used for. All right, so don't worry about that. My mom is not worried about you, Brian. She's really impressed by you.
Okay, I will tell you about the sort. So I do still have imposter syndrome. I'm not kidding about it. But I'd say in terms of like being, I remember it was like 2 years into HubSpot, I joined a CEO group, and I don't know if MBA teams do this, but like it's a group of startups that are scaling 10 CEOs, and you meet once a quarter for a day. And 8 of the CEOs were kind of central casting. They looked like CEOs. They sounded like CEOs. Like, that's what I should be. I should be just like those guys. And then one of them was a guy named Colin Engel who started iRobot, which makes the Roomba vacuum cleaner. You guys might have the Roombas. And the other was a guy named Russ Wilcox, he made the glass for the Kindle. This is a long time ago. And I was trying to be like the other 8. And these two were they're quirky, really quirky guys. And then we got to see each other's numbers. So once a quarter, I'd look at everybody's numbers. And the 2 quirky guys were crushing it, and the central casting CEOs were kind of with it. And I remember at one point I had a conversation with myself, like, why am I trying to be like those guys? I should be like Russ. I should be like Colin. And I'm a little quirky, and I'm like, I'm just going to be myself, like, whatever. And people will put up with it. And it turns out they were willing to put up with it. And it's like, there's a great quote. I forget who did the quote, but like, be yourself, everyone else is taken. And so I have tried to be myself more as time's gone on. And just my co-founder, for sure, it's himself. He is extra duty quirky.
Those guys are the one, like the examples, like Colin and Russ were like good. Like for you, an example of like, because you even said it, like, I think in the face of imposter syndrome, there's nothing better than like the balls to just say like, I'm weird, and own it, right? Like that's like that's where you need to be, but like those guys were that for you.
Alex, I mean, like, we've talked about this before on the pod. We've all gone through that. I mean, when you got drafted number 1, you felt like you had to act like Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning, yeah.
I wasn't enough. Yeah, I got to be somebody else.
You had to be Peyton Manning, and Ravi, I'm sure, when you got into the COO seat, you're looking around, and you probably talked a little bit different, dressed a little bit different. I mean, you may have put on a collar for once.
Dude, I wore a collar every day at Instacart. I had to present the feeling. Now I'm supposed to, dress down a little bit.
Wait, did you guys have imposter syndrome? Shane, did you have it?
Yes.
Did it go away?
No, but in a weird way, it's what drove me. The insecurity drove me. Every year I was terrified. I'm like, this is the year they're going to find out. This is the year. This is the year the curtain's going to be ripped away, and everyone's going to say, aha, I knew it. I knew it. So like I was driven by fear, and someone is going to out me as this imposter, this fraud, and I'm National Player of the Year, a fraud. I'm 6th pick of the draft, fraud. All rookie team, fraud. Right. And like we talk about, so we talk about these bands of going back and forth between overrated, underrated. I'll never forget when I signed my big contract. I signed a 6-year, $36 million contract back in 2005. It was the last time you could get a 6-year deal. And there was a quote in the paper, a national paper, that said, some would think this contract for Battier is too much, but you know what? Sometimes you just got to pay your guy. And I'm like, I knew it. Everyone thinks I'm a bum. Like, I'm not. So like I reached my dream. I make more money than I ever thought I would make, and like this is the pinnacle of my career. And I'm thinking to myself, there it is. I knew it. They knew I was a bum. And after that, like I had a guaranteed contract, so they couldn't fire me. So like I was good, and I relaxed. But 100%, I was driven like by imposter syndrome.
And Brian, it's funny. It's always hard to tell stories after these guys because it's like when I was in the NBA, when I was in the NFL, and I can be like, when I was at Instacart, But it's funny. Claire Hughes Johnson, right?
I know her very well.
So Claire is former COO of Stripe, and like very good friend of mine. Sounds like a very good friend of Brian's, but also like mentor or whatever.
She's on my board.
She is?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Lucky you. So Shane, when I got named COO, I had to make like a tough personnel decision. Okay. So I called Claire And you just talked about the same thing of like, did you feel imposter syndrome? So I was like, shit, I'm talking to Claire. Like she's CEO of Stripe. Like I really look up to her. I'm going to like get her advice, but I'm also going to like show that I know what I'm doing. So same thing. She's like, I have this thing I have to do. Like, she's like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? So I was like, well, I'm planning on letting this person go. And here's what I'm going to say. And literally Claire's response after I went through like my talk, she was like, you're not really going to say that, are you? Right? Like literally that was her response. And I thought I was like, ready to do it. And I was like, no, obviously not, but then what she said was the same thing. She's like, what do you actually think? What do you actually think? Do you think this is a good idea? And I was like, yes. She's like, why? And I told her, she's like, just say that. Don't go through your whole bullshit. Like, just like say what you think. And I think the same thing of like learning from somebody that you really look up to, that like all you have to do is like say what you think. That is the best you can do. The best version that you can bring is that. She helped me so much, but it took her kind of asking the like, are you a fucking idiot? Like, you're not really going to say that, are you? So I think you need those kinds of people, as well.
So Brian, like we all have our stories, and I call it getting to your game. Okay, we finally got to our game. All right, our game might not be like shooting. We might be going to the rack. We're defender. But we all got to our game, you included. So talk about how you can help people in your world get to their game. What's the messaging? How do you get people to focus on what they can do and their capability and their potential and their strengths versus, like you said, I'm not going to worry about mitigating my weaknesses.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm working on these days. I'm chairperson of my company, and I started this climate venture fund, and then I work at Sequoia Capital. And almost everything I do is just coaching other CEOs. I'm basically a CEO, professional CEO coach. And I have been doing it as a hobby, and now I just kind of do it. And I love it. And it's mostly for startups that are going through the same journey HubSpot went through. And I made a lot of mistakes. And I get a lot of joy, and I feel like giving something back to the universe for helping these. And I'll give you an example of how I do it. I just got off of call just before this with what I call the kids table.
You should explain this.
So I have two tables. I have the kids table and the adults table. You know what I mean by the kids table? At Christmas, you have the kids table.
Totally, yes.
Anyway, the kids table are companies in Sequoia's portfolio that are between 5 and 50 million, growing, 200%. They're ripping. And the adults table are, 50 to 500 million, growing very fast. And when you're growing fast, it turns out you have a lot of problems, and they all have the same problems the same size. So I just got off the kids table, which are 8 or 9 companies, and half of it is everyone's just complaining about their employees, and the other half are some good ideas and best practices, what people are working on that are kind of helping them break to the next level. So that's a lot of what I'm up to these days, is kind of CEO coaching. And I'm finding it's very rewarding, actually. I like it a lot.
Do you do these calls together?
Yeah.
So there's some connection in this for them too, right? Like they're not alone in their
very
shit.
much. Misery loves company.
Yeah, for sure. Groups suck.
Yes, it's terrific. And I mentioned I was in the CEO group with Colin Engel, the iRobot guy, and Russ. That was terrific. I was in one when HubSpot was bigger with like the founders of Slack and Shopify and Atlassian, and that was terrific too. Great place to really feel like an imposter, by the way, when you're in those groups.
But Brian, how do you actually do it? If you take what Shane just asked, and I totally get your CEO coaching, and I'm longing for the day that you invite me to the kids and the adults table to like join you as a co-coach, but I'm just waiting to see if I can earn that someday. But separately, how do you actually do it? Like, how do you get someone to see what their strengths and weaknesses are? And then how do you get them to lean into the strengths? Because it is, like you said, natural to try and fix the weaknesses. So what are some of the tactics you use when you're coaching?
Honestly, those calls, I open it up to what are problems people are having. And everyone's having problems, and they're all having the same types of problems. Like everyone is behind on sales rep hiring. Like every single company is behind on sales rep hiring. So it's like, okay, what did you do? And that's what we thought behind sales rep hiring. Like, how did you fix that? So it's things like that. Where I think it's better is in the one-on-ones. And so the CEO, there's a terrific company called Harvey. I love the company. And it's an agent that lawyers use to make themselves much more productive. And it's one of the AI application companies that is really working. And first time CEO, company is ripping, and he's learning it. And he's got venture capitalists on his board, and they're helpful, but they've never seen the movie. So he can be quite vulnerable with me. It's like, this is I'm really stressed about this. Should I be stressed about this? And I can be really straight with him and talk him through it. That is super rewarding. That part of the kind of one-on-one coaching.
Do you think you could have done it when you were younger?
No.
Why?
I hadn't made all the mistakes. I hadn't learned all the stuff. So I'm able to impart some of that on these founders.
As part of this coaching to these employees, we've talked about this. Like, there's a lot of people out there that claim to know how the hell to run a company, right? But there's like very few people like yourself that have like been to the top of Everest, like very few. And yet lots of experts out there. And like, we've talked about this whole like founder mode versus manager mode essay. I think it's a fascinating discussion. I also think it's kind of like the dumbest thing ever that there is one way to do this thing, this insane thing that there's only one way to prescribe and you have to be like one or the other. Like, is this something that founders are even talking about? Like, and obviously you're dealing with, they're all at a different place in their journey, right? Like in time and space. Like, is this something that there's always been, I guess, this classic pushback on as they scale that they have to build more bureaucracy and from a manager mode kind of perspective, a more like classically trained, I guess, manager. Like, I don't know. Are these things you talk about, if that makes any sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Everyone's talking about founder mode. Like, everyone's talking about founder mode. Everyone's using it. It's front and center. I think what's good that's happening right now is there's been kind of a classic playbook of how to be a CEO. And people have just kind of done it the same way. And founder mode came out. There's other stuff that's come out. Like the way Bezos ran Amazon was different. And his leadership principles were kind of different. And the way Jensen Huang runs NVIDIA is very different. And so there's all these new playbooks coming out about how CEOs actually did it that are really divergent from what consensus is. So I think there's kind of a rethinking of what it's like to be a CEO, how you run a company, what those best practices are. And Jensen came and spoke at an event Sequoia had. I don't know Jensen, but he did a little huddle after with a bunch of people. And I asked him, you've got all these unusual best practices. Like, one of his best practices, he doesn't do one-on-one meetings, which is kind of classic Silicon Valley one-on-ones once a week with our employees. He doesn't have small like team meetings. Every meeting is large. He doesn't have like 8 direct reports. He has like 60 direct reports, 50 direct reports. He does something interesting in feedback. He gives positive and negative feedback in front of everyone. Conventional wisdom is give negative feedback in private, positive feedback in public. So he sort of rethought some of the basics of how they teach you to be a manager in Silicon Valley. And and a lot of it kind of resonated with me. And I asked him, like, you've got a very unusual approach. If and when you step down from NVIDIA and a new CEO takes over, will they take over your operating system? And he said, no. He's like, I designed this for myself. It works perfectly for me. The next person should come in and do it however they think they should do it. So I think there's a wholesale kind of rethinking of the role of the CEO, how they do it. And I think it's really positive development. Certainly Elon Musk runs his companies in a very unusual way. And some of them are working really well, some less well, obviously.
Is that something I was going to say that the CEOs ask you? Like, I'm sure, like, you dealt with imposter syndrome. We all have talked about it. I'm sure these CEOs are dealing with it in the moment and are asking questions. Do they need to be more? Do they need to do it a certain way? So is that a narrative that you hear and like push back against?
I try not to impose like, here's how you do it, because I do think everyone should. Jensen said something interesting. He said, no, the next person should do it. And he said, it's almost like you're designing a race car for yourself that fits you perfectly and all your idiosyncrasies perfectly. So I try to be a little less prescriptive. I say, well, here's how we do it at HubSpot. But a lot of times in these calls, I hear, like on this call, we just had this guy named Kareem, terrific guy. He runs a company called Clay. Clay is ripping, terrific company, great CEO. And he was talking about how he hired, and it was really different than what I expected. And he just wasn't doing it the way everyone else did it. And he knew how everyone else did it. And he kind of invented a new way to do it. And he shared it with everyone. And my inclination was like, you go for it. Conventional wisdom was probably wrong about this stuff. You might have it right. Maybe somebody should copy you. So I try not to impose like, here's how to do it. And And if somebody's doing something a little bit weird that sounds like, oh, conventional wisdom might be wrong, you might be right, I encourage it.
The other approach that people, oftentimes talk about, you talk about playbook, it's almost like they're trying to design like a company where if you just hot swapped out the CEO with somebody else, that everything would keep going because it's like the company is the unit and everything is like that. And I think that just like ignores reality. Like that's not how things work. People don't work for companies, they work for people,
Yeah.
right? And I think that the Jensen thing, like that, honestly, and that to me, my annoyance on some of the stuff with founder mode is I just don't think it's unique to a founder necessarily. I think it's unique to a person. Like I think Nikesh Arora at Palo Alto Networks is running it like he owns the business or like he owns a lot of it rather than just like, is entering as a manager. And so, Fiji at Instacart, like, they were running it like they believe it and that like they have the moral authority. And so at least to me, I think one big thing that I believe in is like, you have to make it your own because you have to make it authentic to you. Otherwise, you're not leading in a way that's actually true to yourself. And so I actually like the idea of like, do it your own way. But I just think it's something that's specific to the leader rather than specific to a founder.
I'm going to push back on that though. Like to an extent, yes. Right? You take too much ownership. All right. Brian, you talked about this in your latest paper, right? And you are not in inspiration mode anymore. You are this is my company. This is my company, right? This is my vision, right? And so it's a I mean, you see it more than I do in Silicon Valley, but it's very, very difficult to lead people once they feel they're living someone else's vision and someone else's dream versus having ownership in what we're trying to create here.
One of the things I actually was going to ask you guys about, so back to the Boston sports. The Red Sox, part of the reason Boston sports fans are incorrigible is we didn't win a World Series for 86 years, and we're just passionate Red Sox fans. We finally won in 2004.
I do appreciate that you said we about the losses too. Like when I was at Duke, one thing that would happen is people would say we about the basketball team and they about the football team. Like, oh, they lost, we won. And you're just like, no, you can't do that. You're we on both. So I do appreciate you saying that.
Okay. That was a quick pickup. But kind of the magic of that team was it was a whole bunch of people that were grown up through their system. They drafted them out of friggin' high school. They went to the minors. And then they had Curt Schilling and Pedro Martinez and David Ortiz, who were expensive free agents. And it was that mixture of homegrown and veteran talent, not a lot of it, but enough veteran talent that really pushed them over the edge. I always thought HubSpot worked best when you had one or two sort of free agents from the outside that would hire from whatever, Salesforce.com or something, but mostly homegrown. Like if you look at the HubSpot management team today, it is pretty much homegrown. There's two kind of veteran free agents. How is it like that in the NFL, and how is it like that in the NBA on the homegrown versus like, what was the deal with it?
I think it's there. Absolutely. Like even just to go back to the college football dynamic that's changed now with the transfer portal, like look at these schools like Florida State and Colorado that have like gone all in on the transfer portal where they get 50 new kids a year. Like the entire roster turns over. These literally are mercenaries, right? And there's not a lot of success. And there's like pushback against some of these. Like certainly there's a balance to your point. Like, you do have to go be selective in free agency, but a lot of your culture, again, in the heart of your team needs to be, developed from the ground up. And then pro sports, I think it's a huge balancing act. Like they're obviously I think teams that are far more active in free agency and going out and getting these players and trying to do the quick fix. And then there's these organizations that don't. And add little pieces to it. Again, I think about your Patriots that like, the core of that locker room, like the Teddy Bruschi's and like, the guys that like were the heartbeat of that. And then they would add little pieces. Oh, we can go trade for Randy Moss. Cause like, again, our culture is set and now he's going to come in and kind of, that presence is so strong that he's going to have to, adapt to us as opposed to like the other way around. But I think the great organizations find that balancing act. Absolutely. And I think the struggling ones, you OD on like the mercenary, like I think, it's a tough battle to climb, tough hill.
Shane, you had that with your teams.
Look, I'm a good guy, but I was kind of a mercenary when I went to the Miami Heat. Okay, so LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, they get together. They have the big parade. Not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7. Okay, on paper, that team was so talented, right? You have first ballot, generational players. And they found out the hard way that talent isn't enough. They got beat in the finals by Mavericks team that had, 2 Hall of Famers, but a bunch of guys that just played together and played their roles. And I give LeBron, Dwayne, and Chris a lot of credit. They learned a lot. Okay, for as great as they were, they learned, hey, like, it's not just about our skill, right? And, I saw that. If the Miami Heat would have won that championship, there's no way I would have gone to Miami. I was a free agent. I was going to San Antonio. But I thought, these guys are going to win. I can help them win. And so it's the right place for me. So when I went, I was really amazed by just sort of the humility, but also the drive those guys had and the organization had. And again, I think they overthought the amount of glue guys that it took to get it done. And we had tremendous glue guys in that locker room, like Hall of Fame, Udonis Haslem and Mike Miller, Mario Chalmers, Rashard Lewis, Ray Allen at the end of his career, amazing glue guy. And we put together a team that was truly a team, right? And the beauty of that team was that, as great as the Hall of Famers were, the big 3 were, they were part of a well-oiled machine. And we went back-to-back championships, go to 3 finals. At the end, we were a little bit tired and lost to the Spurs, but it was an amazing lesson that, yes, you got to have horses. You got to have horses to get in the race, right? But it takes really a team. It takes everybody's talents to reach the pinnacle. And so it was fun to live that and to see it live.
Shane, just for the digression, can you tell us, you talked about the big 3, can you tell us about the little 12? and the origin of that nickname.
So that's obviously we all know who the stars are. All right. So HubSpot, it's, head of sales and the sales team. They're all the kind of the athletes, the jocks. And so same thing happened in Miami with the big 3. Okay. And those guys are awesome teammates, but they were divas. And they got special.
They were.
they were divas, and we called them on it. But it was, every team has like special fan appreciation night, and for us, it was casino night. And casino night is like the one night where they serve like the fan base like free alcohol. They open up the arena and we play table games. So like we're all out there like in the mask. People are pretty loose. All right, so I got women like grabbing my ass and like it's crazy. I'm looking around and I don't see the big 3. All right, I don't see LeBron, D Wade, and Chris in this meat market that we're thrown out to, once a year to thank our fans, which is awesome, but it gets handsy. And so I look around and I'm like, where are the big 3 at? And someone said, they had a private reception with a select group of courtside season tickets before the Vegas night. And I'm like, what is this shit? What is this? This is a dichotomy. This is unfair. I say, well, what do we have here? We got the big 3 and the little 12. So that's how the little 12 was born, and it became a thing. And so as much as we love the big 3, we told them you cannot win without the little 12. And that I should trademark that, but that was from Vegas night and a few handsy, season ticket holders.
Halligan, speaking of legends, stepping out, we got to talk about you stepping out of HubSpot, out of the CEO role, right? And going into, by the way, I'm at sort of high ego that you didn't fight with my classification of you as a legend.
By the way, it was so smooth, that transition right there, Ravi.
You call me a legend all the time. Like, I'm used to it.
I love it. I love it. Look, you gotta own, have your game. But I think that maybe a few things. One, how long had you been CEO and obviously founder, but before the snowmobile accident? And what were you thinking before the snowmobile accident? What were you thinking after? And tell us all about it. Obviously, we have Alex here who had, kind of a life-threatening injury as well, and a really impactful one. And so there's a lot here.
Okay. I'll tell you the snowmobile. So I was HubSpot CEO for 15 years, and I was snowmobiling one day, and I basically went off a cliff. My son was driving, and I was on the back, and there was a big curve coming up. I tapped him on the helmet, and I said, it's a big turn coming. You have to slow down. I snowmobile a lot, and he heard me, shook his head. And he hadn't snowmobile a lot. It's not his fault. He got kind of the breaking the gas backwards. Hit the gas at the wrong time. We went up over the lip and just lost gravity. I remember going over and just like, oh my God. And then your brain just gets shut up. I don't remember flying down a mile down, smashing snowmobiles in 1,000 pieces. We were in 1,000 pieces. And we're lying at the bottom of the snow. We were passed out for a while. I don't know how long. I woke up first, woke him up, and we were a mess. And I just remember sitting there like, I don't think we're going to live. Like, we were in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have our phone. It was freezing cold, and no one knew where we were. I was like, this is it. And I remember sitting there, if like I get out of this thing, I'm going to make some changes. And I'm going to go through all the changes I wanted to make. But one of them was like, I don't really enjoy day-to-day being CEO of HubSpot anymore. It's got 8,000 people. It's just not the same for me. I'd like a smaller company. I'm gonna resign if I live. And I made some other promises to myself. It turned out we're sitting there for an hour, and I didn't think I had my phone. I did have my phone. He's like, check again. And I had just enough bars, 2 bars, and AT&T really saved our lives. Dialed 911. 911, by the way, I wish I was a startup. I would definitely invest in it. It's a fantastic service. And anyway, I remember the lady's very quick call, and she's like, well, sit tight. And I was like, oh, I can't move. I said, definitely sit tight. And then she called the local fire stations in Vermont, Woodstock and Bridgewater. And the volunteers know in the fire station. So then she has to figure out the mobile phones of the first responders in the area, calls them, and then they take their snowmobiles around, and they come and find us. So they start working on my son first. And I remember the guy who found us because he kind of got on top of me. And his face was right on top of my face, and he's like, Halligan. I said, yeah. He said it like he knew me. It's like, it's Joey. Yeah, okay. Yeah, can you help me out? He's like, no, it's Joey. I mow your lawn. I plow your driveway. And I was like, can you get me out of here? He's like, yeah. So they kind of glue us together, helicopter us to Dartmouth University, and anyway, put Humpty Dumpty and his son back together. So you can't see it now, but like underneath my shirt, there's like massive scars. I don't have a leg that looks as bad as Alex, but I've got 33 screws in me, bunch of loose ones in my head. And I'm very lucky to be alive. But I guess the reason we prime this story is I was out of work for 7 months. I couldn't work. I was in a wheelchair. And at the end of the 7 months, it's like, there's a woman who's running HubSpot, who's doing a great job. All this kind of like, I'm out. All yours. And I'm much happier not being seen.
Man, I feel like there's a lot there. Did you break your fib, by the way? Is that right? Did you break your leg?
Yeah.
Join the club. Small brotherhood of tib fibs. Likely it's the only one I broke.
My leg looks awful. It's covered on both sides with huge scars, but nothing like yours, man. Wow.
So literally, I mean, you kind of have, different than mine. You're laying there. I mean, like you're like that. How long were you there before they found you?
A couple hours, hour and a half, a while. We sitting there in the snow.
And while you're lying there, distinctly one of the thoughts is that if I get out of this,
I'm going to make all kinds of things in my life. And I think it's like almost dying is kind of useful for living.
Yeah, for sure.
What else did you think about? Did you have any other revelations in the snow that moment?
It's some things that have changed. I'm not going to go through everything, so it's really personal, but I would just say it really edited down the number of relationships I have with other humans, and anyone who wasn't sort of adding energy in my life, I edited out. And I'm much closer to my family, much closer to my son, and much closer to my very close group of friends, and that's been very different. And it's been great.
What was that process like? So was your son's injuries similar? Did you guys have,
He also broke his leg, broke his knee, hit his head real bad. He had a bunch of bad injuries too.
And so you're kind of doing rehab and healing together on this journey?
During COVID, it was this really weird time to do it, so no one can visit you in the hospital. It was a very odd time. But the nurses, I feel like, really saved my life. The doctors and the nurses were amazing.
And when did you make the official decision? Like, when did you were like, I'm doing this, I'm stepping away? Like, where in the journey?
I decided that day in the snow. And then I couldn't work. I was really debilitated for a long period of time. And then maybe 4 or 5 months in, I was in a wheelchair. I could kind of get around. I had my co-founder come and visit me, and I was like, "Listen, I'm hanging him up," and he was surprised, and he pushed back a little bit. I was like, "I made my mind up." The more interesting conversation was with the woman who was running HubSpot while I was out,
and she's still the CEO.
Yeah. A couple of interesting things about that. The week before my accident, we had a board meeting, and on the agenda of the board meeting was Brian dash hit by a bus. Just a stupid analogy people in business use, like if the CEO gets hit, what happens? And it was a very great conversation. We had this woman, Yamini, she's fabulous, and my co-founder and I were like, Yamini should take over. I was like, cool. And it's like, he's not going to get by a bus. And then snowmobile accident. And so about 6 months into my rehab, I called her, and I needed to tell her that I wasn't taking over. And I called her, and it's funny. I heard her husband tell the story. She was downstairs, and I texted her, "Hey, can you talk on the phone?" And I hadn't talked to her for a long time. And she looked at her husband and she said, "Brian wants me to call him. I think he's going to fire me. He's going to fire me." And her husband is Cash, a really funny guy, and he's in the industry. And he's like, she thought she was going to get fired. She went up and had a phone call with me. And I said, "I'm not coming back. You're doing a terrific job. I'd love you to be the CEO of HubSpot." And she said, "Hell no, I really don't like the job. It's brutal." "No, I'll be your COO or co-CEOs, but I'm not ready. No way." I was like, "Either it's you or we're going to hire some schmuck from the outside. So you ought to do it." So she agreed to do it. And then she comes downstairs to her husband and she's crying. And her husband was like, "Oh, he thought she got fired."
Brian, what is that? One of the things you wrote again yesterday, and you've told me separately, is like a lot of CEOs don't like their jobs. Like now that you've told that story, you've told it to a few people, like they confide in you when you ask them, "Do you like your job?" What have you learned on that? Like one, like do people not like it? Why do they stay in it? Like what have you learned on that?
They don't like the day-to-day work of it. They like the mission. They like the ego. They like the brand. But for the most part, almost none of them like the work. I think most CEOs overestimate their value to the company. I won't say which company. This is a Sequoia company. And I was talking to the CEO. He's going through some hard times, actually. And I said, "Why don't you resign? Like every time I talk to you, you're complaining a lot. And doesn't seem like you're happy. Like you've got couple kids or wife, you seem like outside of work. I kind of know him a little bit. He seems awesome." And he's like, "Oh, the company would never survive without me." It's like, you'd be surprised.
Brian, when did it change? Like when during the journey of HubSpot did it like get to a point where the scale, I guess, or like after going public, like when did it become more negative than positive?
And some people like, Yamini, the woman who runs HubSpot, likes this phase. It's fine. I kind of break it as like 1 to 10 employees, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 10,000 plus, 1,000 plus. 1 to 10, I would give myself like a C plus. Like my co-founder did 99% of the work in the very early stage.
How about joy though? Like fulfilling, like those same stages from that standpoint.
Same, C plus. Like we didn't know if it was going to work. It's like, I would put when we were like 5 employees, I would put the odds that we would have created a company worth $25 billion very low. Like it wasn't going that well. 10 to 100, I was super comfortable, happy, and kind of joyful. The business starting to work. I knew what I was doing. I'd been in a company that size before. Like I thought it was actually good. 100 to 1,000, I had some experience in there too. I kind of liked it, B plus, and then 1,000 plus, C minus. I just didn't enjoy the day to day of it. Yeah, and probably shame on me. I should have crafted like if all this founder mode stuff and Jensen Huang stuff and if all of this talk about how do you be a CEO and how do you design the job for yourself had been around then, I I think I would have been a little bit bolder in how I approach things. Anyway, I didn't like my job then. And most CEOs of startups, they're risk seeking, they're early stage people. They do it, they do it for a lot of reasons, but the day-to-day joy of it typically isn't one of them.
Why did you stay before? Because I take your point on why other people stay, right? All the things you said. There's ego, there's sort of overestimating your own importance. You don't strike me as actually somebody who cares a ton about what other people think. By the way, just as an aside, every time at Sequoia we hire somebody, we write a memo with like what our thesis is for what they're going to be. And in Brian's memo, Pat Grady wrote it, and then there's a list of pros and then risks. And one of the pros for Brian is DGAF. Okay, so for those that are not inclined, it stands for doesn't give a fuck. But then one of the risks for Brian was also DGAF, doesn't give a fuck, which I just thought was a cool description of Brian. But were you like
both sides of that are right? By the way,
no. Having worked with you now, I can tell you I agree with that characterization. But I love it. But why were you staying before the snowmobile accident?
I have an ego. I'm not devoid of it. HubSpot and I sort of merged, our brands merged. I was very proud of it. It's the biggest tech company in Boston. I'm a Boston person. There's a fair amount of ego in it, Ravi.
No, I love that you told us. That makes total sense.
Yeah. And I also thought, like, what? They're going to have a hard time without me. Like, the founder has like a lot of moral authority inside a company, more than the founder deserves. You just have moral authority, and you're able to take risks and bets and zig when everyone thinks you should zag. And if you're right on some of those, you get a lot of moral authority. And I was like, I'm not sure someone could do as good a job, and I'm worried that the company will go sideways.
Does the snowmobile accident, then if I try to like put my finger on it, does the thing that it does kind of like remove the ego side of it and just kind of be like, that doesn't fucking matter? Like, what am I doing? Is that like the sort of why behind the snowmobile accident making such a big difference?
It's life's short, and I could get in a car accident, anything could happen. Like, I don't need the money. Why am I doing this stuff? I should do things that bring me joy. So I just try to be a little more planful and designful of my life. Like, in everything now, I'm a lot more intentional about what I'm working on, who I'm working with.
During your transition away, because your transition's then unique because you're like in the middle of this body rehab, like you're reconstructing your entire body and life and career at the same time. I was also in a wheelchair for a long time, and I cannot get out of my head like being stuck in the wheelchair. And I had so much negative self-talk about like the things I would never be able to go do again, which then in turn though, like it did flip for me. Those became the things that I chased, like in my rehab, right? Like that fueled me. Like, I want to go see if I can do these things again. What were those things for you?
The wheelchair thing for me was, I felt very trapped, and I had anxiety, like really bad anxiety and panic attacks, a lot. And that was worse than the injuries. I had a concussion, but I don't think it was even the concussion. I think it was just kind of I couldn't leave the house. And it was COVID, and yeah, I've always had a little bit of anxiety issues for my whole career. But it just roared into my life and had lots of panic attacks. And I have a lot of empathy for people who go through that. It's better now. But during that time in the wheelchair, I just felt so trapped and useless and anxious. This anxiety was the thing that hit me.
Who did you lean on? I mean, obviously you're trying to put your physical body back together. You're transitioning from the thing that you built, that you love the most from a professional standpoint. That's a lot. Like, who did you lean on for anything, for comfort?
Okay, so one of the things at the bottom of the cliff, I had a girlfriend at the time, and it wasn't going well. Neither of us were happy. And I decided at the bottom of the cliff, like, that's it. It's going to be better for both of us to move on. And so I really didn't have anyone. I was in this house in Vermont alone. I had a lot of friends that came and saw me and hung with me. And I had a lot of family that did that. And so some very close friends hung with me, and very close family members. The other thing that kind of helped, this is going to be weird and hippy-dippy for this kind of show, but when you have a concussion, everyone you talk to is like, you should meditate. You should meditate. Your psychologist says it, your shrink says it, your doctor says it, every online article is meditating. So I started meditating a lot. And I just remember there was one interesting day in like a few weeks into the rehab. I was lying in bed, all casted up. And every day physical therapists are fantastic. The physical therapist came over my house, and it was a new one. And she walked in and sat on the end of the bed, and she put her hand on my leg very gently. And she looked at me like right in the eye and said, "How are you?" And there's just something about the way she did it that I cried for 20 minutes. Like, I obviously am not well. How am I? Not good. And I just couldn't stop crying. And so I sort of pulled myself together, and I said, well, that was an odd reaction I had to you. Like, is that typical? She's like, well, I'm a physical therapist, but I'm a shaman. I was like, huh. And so she started coming to my house and burning like fancy scents and meditating with me and doing shaman like stuff with me. That helped a ton. It turns out it sounds really weird. That helped a ton. This like random lady in the middle of Vermont who's a shaman physical therapist helped me a ton.
Glue gal.
She's a glue gal.
She qualifies as a glue gal.
Yes.
Oh man,
I think you're spot on. I think for people that go through physically traumatic injuries, like so often the focus is always on the physical, right? And you have doctors and PTs and nurses that help you with that. And there is, and in fact, I think the mental journey is way worse and harder. And because you don't get a lot of treatment for it, right? Like you like think about it, you're stuck in your wheelchair in COVID, the mind wanders, and you can play tricks on you and like isolated. And so I don't think it ever gets talked about enough. Did you and your son do any of that together though? Like as far as the rehab and stuff and like the journey?
We did some of that. It weirdly bonded us, and we're very, very tight now. It weirdly bonded us. And we try to celebrate on the anniversary of the accident every year. He's in college now. He's in New York.
You're a live day.
Yeah, basically.
It's called a live.
Yeah, basically.
Brian, can I tell you something that I was thinking about when you were talking about the shaman?
Yep.
I have so much like admiration for you that you like tell us about. I stayed in the job because of ego, right? I stayed in the job because I care what other people think. And it's like absolute like stereotype, big time founder, big company, I'm the man, all this stuff, right? And then you also tell us that like, but then I cried for reasons I don't know what the hell was. And part of the way I got back was through a shaman. And the reason I tell you that is like, it's just like like you're like really introspective. You're really honest. And then also on the like shaman things, I know you said you guys don't think it's hippy dippy, dude. Like all I think is like everyone they need to know themselves well enough to know what they need.
I couldn't agree more. And I think great leaders are all of those. Like they're vulnerable, they're authentic, they're real, right? It isn't some fucking document that you subscribe to, right? Like it just be you and be comfortable in yourself and be transparent. And now that you like mentor, CEOs for a living, like, is that anything? And I'm sure it was part of HubSpot's journey, right? Like I think every company or team takes on the characteristics of their leader.
I think they do too. Very much so. I think they're very, very, I think the company very much reflects the CEO for good and bad.
On that same note, like for good or bad, when did you guys become obsessive about culture? And like, I loved reading even the note that like culture is going to happen whether you like it or not. So you might as well be like intentional about it, right? Like when did culture become a thing for you guys?
Yeah, I remember the day. The first 2.5 years of HubSpot, my co-founder and I just didn't talk about culture. If anyone brought it up, I'd say, we're MIT guys, like, can't measure it. It sounds like bull crap. And then I joined the CEO group with this guy, Colin Engel, the founder of the iRobot company we talked about before. And in the topic of the first day of the CEO group is all day, once a quarter. I sat down in the meeting next to this guy, Colin Engel, and they gave us the topic. There's 10 of us. We had to talk about culture. And I was like, this sucks. Like, it's such a waste of time. I don't want to talk about culture. And so I pouted most of the morning and didn't really engage in the CEO group's conversation about culture. And then at lunchtime, Colin says to me, Halligan, you don't like this? Like, what the fuck? And I was like, I think it's a waste of time. He said, Brian, culture's how you scale HubSpot. Culture's how people make decisions when you're not in the room. Okay. I participated in the afternoon. I have a large part of Colin. And then the next day I got to the office and I bumped into Dharmesh, my co-founder, in the morning. He was like, how's the CEO meeting? I was with all the it's the first one. How did it go? I said, it went great. He said, what'd you talk about? I said, we talked about culture. He said, oh, that's too bad. What a waste of time. I said, no, Dharmesh, culture is how we're going to scale HubSpot. Culture is how people make decisions when we're not in the room. I gave him the Colin Engel line. And it was in that meeting, whenever we had an hour free, it would get on a whiteboard. And I was like, you should be our culture. I get an idea. You should be our culture czar. And my co-founder Dharmesh is the most introverted human on the planet. He said, I hate humans. I said, no, you'd be great at it. You'd be great at it. And it's very hard to delegate to my co-founder. Like, he's just very good at deflecting stuff he doesn't want to do. It's kind of a superpower of his. I caught him in a weak moment. He was like, all right, I'll give it a go. And he did something very smart. He doesn't like to talk to humans. So he sent a survey to all the employees. And he asked them, like, what do you think of our culture? And how would you rate our culture on a scale of 1 to 10? And he got the results back, and people wrote detailed responses. And he built a culture code, which is like a 128 slide PowerPoint deck.
It's awesome.
That he posted.
It is awesome.
He posted online, and it exploded. And
this is like 11 years ago, right? Like, it's still amazing.
Yeah, a long time ago, longer than that, I think. And anyway, that was smart. And so I advised my other CEOs to be intentional about your culture. And then people make mistakes on it, though. They produce a culture code deck, and it looks like everybody else's, and it's not unique. And what you need to do when you think about culture, it's like the products. Like, you get the product you're selling to your customers, you get your product you're selling to your employees, your culture. It's got to be unique, just like your product is you sell to your customers, and it's got to be valuable. And so a lot of them are milquetoast, and a lot of them, like, they put out an aspirational culture and they talk the talk, and they don't walk the walk in the culture. So a lot of it fails. He kind of nailed it. And that worked. And then once a quarter, we survey all the employees and we ask them to tell us what they think about working at HubSpot and score it. We're into the Net Promoter Score thing. And right next to HubSpot, there's a terrific Thai restaurant called Similans. And in Similans, you've got one of those big plastic Thai restaurant menus, and have all the different items, like Dom Yum Goong soup, and they'll have 4 chilies next to it, like really hot, and then chicken kra pao, 3 chilies, quite hot. And so we would take the results from the survey, and we would make a Thai menu with, like, everyone wants a raise. We're pissed about how much you make. 4 chilies on that, then 3 chilies on this. And we post all the results on the wiki so everyone could see it. And then we'd say, hey, we're not going to give everyone a raise. We hear you. You're like, maybe next year we'll look at it, but we just finished giving you a no. And so that's those are my 2 best practices that really worked on culture. Is writing it down, being intentional, being unique, treat it like a product, continue to iterate, and then really acting on all that feedback and being very transparent. So we spent a lot of time on that.
It's not a one-time thing.
No,
you don't just get to you've got to work at it, and it's changing.
It changes, especially as you get bigger. It lives and breathes.
Well, Brian, we're going to let you go, but I guess I'll tell you this. We can agree to disagree on whether you were a glue guy for HubSpot.
Okay.
What I can tell you is somehow you've managed to be a glue guy for just people in general, and for leaders and for CEOs. and, for like humanity. And dude, like that is pretty awesome. And we are really proud that you came and spent time with us, and we're really grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Brian.
Honor being on. Thanks, guys.
Hey.